Hi, everyone, and welcome to the American Solar Energy Society's third webinar in our series. ASES is a nonprofit working to accelerate the transformation to a 100% renewable energy and sustainable living society. You can support ASES by joining or donating today at ases.org. Some of our events include the National Solar Tour happening in early October, as well as the National Solar Conference happening this summer, August 5th to the 9th in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we will be offering NABCEP courses along with our regular conference content. More information about the conference can be found online at ases.org/conference. I'd like to invite you all to become members of ASES, and today we're offering all of you 25% off discount to join as professional members up until May 31st. 2019. To join, you can go to ases.org/join and use promo code ASESWebinar, all one word, to receive the discount. I'd also like to invite everyone to participate in this webinar by sending in questions or comments to the chat room in Q&A for Jean-Pierre to review and answer in his live Q&A after the webinar content airs. I'd now like to turn it over to Jean-Pierre, who will be presenting our webinar today on solar power and renewable energy solutions for buildings.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jean-Pierre Clejan, Technology Executive of GreenLogic Energy, a design and build renewable energy integrator located in Long Island, New York. GreenLogic specializes in commercial and residential net zero and near zero energy project. We're a design and build contractor. I'm grateful to the American Solar Energy Society for allowing me the opportunity to present this webinar. This is the first in what will hopefully be many webinars aimed towards the design professionals, such as architects, lead APs, engineers, real estate developers, and people in the construction trade. This will be a 2-hour program with 2 credits for architects and engineers. An hour 45 of the program will be in the form of slides, and the final 15 minutes will be spent in questions and answers. I invite you to enter your questions into the Q&A box, and I will do my best to answer them all live in the last 15 minutes. If you have questions that are very specific to your projects or too long to answer within the time we have, I will answer your questions offline and share the results with everyone in the audience. Again, I'm grateful to American Solar Energy Society for the opportunity to present to all of you. And without further ado, let me start the slideshow portion of the program. Thank you very much. Today's program is solar power and renewable energy solutions for buildings. The goal of this is for you to understand how, through your projects, we can make the world a greener place by reducing carbon emissions and climate change effects from the built environment. This program is going to take it from the top down, from the million-foot level view, down to details of individual projects that have either vastly reduced or eliminated their carbon footprint and energy expenses altogether through the use of renewable energy and energy efficiency. Of course, this is copyrighted material, so you're not allowed to duplicate this or reuse this in any way. The learning objectives are to walk away with the need for why you have to establish guidelines within your projects to reduce the carbon emissions through renewable energy and energy efficiency. You're going to understand the solar resource and how powerful it is and all the different ways that we can leverage that. And we're going to also understand why solar electricity is enormously popular and widely deployed. The technology is very reliable these days, very predictable, and you want to employ that in your projects if at all possible. The case studies are included to show how these projects worked out in real life, so you understand that this is not pie in the sky. This is real life projects that can have these enormous savings in energy purchases and reductions in carbon footprint. So in order, I'm going to go through the sun's energy and all the different ways it's being applied and can be applied. I'm going to go through solar power, its best practices, prerequisites, and how we use solar power to decarbonize buildings. That's what we're going to focus on here today. I'm going to go through a series of case studies, commercial and residential, of buildings that are net zero or near zero energy. Then I'm going to recap the program and go on to the Q&A portion of the program. So let's first understand how the building environment fits into the overall picture of energy consumption. Obviously, with energy consumption comes carbon footprint in today's world. So where does the energy go in the United States? We have access to older data. This takes a few years to compile. So what we're seeing here is the 2016 data of where the energy went in the United States. What you'll see on the right are two sectors that we don't control. The industrial sector, factories, metallurgy, things like that. We don't control that, but that uses up 32% of the energy consumed within the United States. Transportation is another sector we don't control. The planes, the trains, the buses, the cars, that has a carbon footprint and energy consumption as well. And again, we don't control that directly. However, if we look to our left, we see the sectors that are within the control of the building professionals. In particular, we take the commercial buildings, we add that to the residential buildings, and these two sectors together represent the vast majority. So we're talking 40% of the total in our sectors versus, let's say, 32% for industrial and 29% for transportation. To give you an idea of trends, over time, the transportation sector is growing. I guess we have reduced regulation, relatively low fuel prices, and parts of the world that are getting their first vehicles. But within the United States, the buildings do represent the largest single slice of the pie, and we want to make a difference in that slice of the pie with our new construction major renovation projects. So let's understand where this energy comes from. So we have a lot of different sources available to us. Let me outline that for you. This is a slide with a lot of material, but I think this can help get perspective for all of you in terms of where energy can come from, what are our sources. There's a lot on this graph. First, you see the big yellow sun in the middle. This is the amount of sunlight that the Earth receives in the course of the year. That's the area of the yellow circle. The white dot is 1 year's worth of energy consumption by the human race. So clearly the sun can keep up with the amount of energy consumed by the human race. Let's get into the other fuel sources that are in play and how they're represented here. The non-renewable sources are here on the left. So here we have our coal, our uranium, we have our petroleum, our natural gas, our tar sands. Now that area of each of those non-renewable sources represents the total reserves that are known. So all the coal in the world is represented by this one here and so forth. So without thinking about climate change, you can see pretty clearly that the energy consumption by humans will eventually consume all of the non-renewable resources you see on the left. So that little white dot, not only is it growing over time as more parts of the world are getting their first air conditioning, their first cars, and their first electricity, but the reserves that are on the left are not really getting any bigger. So over time, without climate change, we would slowly deplete all of the non-renewable resources out there. Now, let's go to the renewable resources because those are the ones that are being replenished. Each of the circles on the right side represent 1 year's worth of energy. So 1 year's worth of wind, 1 year of ocean thermal energy, 1 year of biomass, 1 year of hydropower, 1 year of wind, 1 year of deep drill geothermal, 1 year worth of tidal energy. Those are renewable resources. So we can clearly see that many of these approach the size of the human consumption. So if we switched from the fossil fuel sources, non-renewable sources on the left, to the renewable sources on the right, we could continue going forever without running out of energy. Now that leaves climate change to the side. Obviously, all the sources on this side of the graph are carbon emission free. In other words, if we were to use those as our energy sources, we would not have the carbon emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by the use of fossil fuel to create energy. So again, we've established that buildings are the biggest consuming sector in the United States, the one sector that we control. We've also established that the energy consumption by the human race will eventually outstrip all of the non-renewable sources. However, there are plenty of renewable sources available to us, the sun itself being the biggest one of them. So the amount of energy that we get from the sun is huge compared to the other energy sources. As you saw, 1 year's worth of sunlight is vastly more than 1 year, than all the petroleum we have or all the coal we have. Now, it's important to realize that the sun hitting the earth, it does different things already. So for example, hydropower, that is a derivative of sunlight. It's the sun that creates the clouds by heating up water on the ground, and those clouds eventually turn into rain or snow, and that's what feeds our hydroelectric plants. So hydropower is in fact a derivative of solar energy. Same is said for the wind. The wind is caused by thermal differences over the planet, and the sun heating up parts of the world at different times is what causes wind energy. So wind is another byproduct of sunlight. Now, biomass, to put it in more practical terms, you could have someone in the very cold parts of the United States who heats their home with wood pellets. Well, assuming that the trees are replanted that are used to make the wood pellets, that's a renewable source. The sun makes the trees grow, the trees turn to wood pellets run the wood stove, and continuously as new trees are grown. Now understand that the fossil fuel sources we have are actually old biomass. That's plant matter and animal matter from millions of years ago that's been decomposed into oil, coal, and natural gas. So we have our new biomass that's being created every day, and we have the old biomass that's now fossil fuel sequestered under the ground. Now, we can convert sunlight directly into electricity or heat by mechanical methods. We're going to get into great detail about that. As a byproduct of the sun's operation, it does create a constant temperature right below the Earth's surface. So if you live in a part of the United States where the average year-round temperature is 60 degrees, of course, it's the sun that makes it so, by drilling down, let's say 20 feet, it'll also be 60 degrees. That constant Earth surface temperature in any spot within the United States, that can be used for geothermal heating and cooling by exchanging heat between the building and the ground below. We're going to get into a lot more detail shortly on that. Now, let's go through each of the renewable sources we're talking about. Hydroelectricity is a great resource. It's one of our biggest contributors on the renewable energy side of life. And the good news is a large-scale public works project. These can last essentially forever. They're completely carbon-free. They can also be used for energy storage by pumping water back into the upper reservoir. However, we have to bring this back into the present and realize, well, there's certain limitations. First of all, some of the great locations for this are nowhere near civilization. So in that instance, you could have a great resource, but the question is how to get the energy to where the loads are that will consume that. Second, there are environmentalists and people that are concerned that building these kind of plants affects the local wildlife, fish, trees, habitat. So there is a question as to whether environmentally more hydroelectric plants will be allowed, and if so, under what conditions. And third, and most recent, is even though historically hydroelectricity has been very consistent, unfortunately with climate change, that's no longer the case. In the recent California droughts, the hydroelectric sources essentially dried up from lack of rain and snow. And fortunately for California, with the nuclear power they have and the solar power they have, they were able to continue operations. But hydroelectricity can be intermittent if our source of rain or snow is also intermittent. Next, we have our wind energy. You're seeing a small example of this. Let me look at this globally for a second. Europe has both land-based and ocean-based turbines. They have both. Within the United States, we almost entirely have land-based turbines, mostly in the Southwest. The offshore turbines are just starting to be installed along the eastern seaboard. We're going to see a lot more of that in the future. The good news is the wind is a very powerful resource. In the ocean and in flat areas that are windy, it can be easily harnessed. However, it is not really suitable at a small scale in most cases. So for example, the turbine you see in this photo is for a vineyard. The tower is 125 feet above the ground. And because this area is completely flat, there's no obstacles and no turbulence, and it's in a very windy place, which is the North Fork of Long Island, this actually can have a meaningful production. It's also on a parcel that can meet the zoning rules. In this particular case, the tower can fall in any direction without hitting anything on the survey. It won't hit the buildings or anything else. How is this turbine used? Unlike the ones I mentioned before that are used to sell energy to the power companies, like the land-based utility scale turbines, the ocean-based utility scale turbines, this is used for a very specific purpose. The vineyard has a very powerful irrigation system that's electric, and if they turn the irrigation on in the absence of the wind turbine, they would face a huge demand charge from the power company from turning on their irrigation late on summer afternoons. Interestingly, it's windy late summer afternoons in the summer, so in this case, the vineyard waits till the wind comes up. When the turbine is fully operational and generating electricity, then they turn on their irrigation system. This way, the power company doesn't see their irrigation system, and they're not charged the huge demand charge that goes with that. So again, wind is a great resource. We're going to see a lot more of it. The offshore wind will be especially productive because it's windier in the ocean and there's less obstacles. However, it is not really suitable at a small scale. So if you don't have enough height, you don't have enough wind, or you have turbulence from obstacles, not a great application. Now, what other forms can solar energy be converted into? It does create the wind, it does create the hydropower. We've talked about the biomass and the Earth surface temperatures. Now let me talk about passive solar for a second. This is not new at all. From the photo you see on the right, the Native Americans in the Southwest figured out a way of staying comfortable regardless of the temperatures. So what you're seeing is a south-facing rock facade with a dwelling built into that facade, which basically overhangs the dwelling. The Native Americans figured out that in the summer, the sun is very high in the sky, and the top of the cliff is basically blocking the sunlight from beating down on the face of the caves. However, in the winter, the sun is lower in the sky, and the sun beats directly down onto the face of the caves. So what they have is passive cooling. The sun into the caves is blocked in the summer when the sun is high, and passive heating. When the sun is low, it hits directly to the front of the rock surface and warms up the cave inside. We can use similar passive solar elements within our buildings to reduce the amount of heating and cooling required, which reduces, of course, the energy consumption as well. Now, mechanical conversion. We can convert sunlight into both heat pretty easily. That's an older application, or more recently into electricity with the photovoltaic effect. The solar thermal's been around for a very long time. Solar electricity is a development from Bell Labs from the 1950s. They figured out by using specially treated silicon, they can make electricity directly from sunlight. We call that photovoltaic, from the Greek photos and volts, and we use the acronym PV to describe that. Now, electricity can be a very useful thing. Not only do all our buildings use electricity, but we could certainly electrify other sectors like transportation, and we can make that electricity over time be low in carbon and finally completely carbon free. So electrification can be a good thing. Now let's see what goes into the electric mix within the United States. We realize that buildings are the biggest slice of the pie. They consume the most. And we realize that the resources that are out there, all the renewable ones, are considerably greater long-term than what we have in fossil fuel reserves. Let's see what happened in 2017 within the United States. For the energy produced by the power companies, this slice represents what came from natural gas. This slice represents what came from coal. And on the opposite side, we're seeing the zero carbon sources, including on this side, we have our wind, we have our solar, we have our deep drill geothermal, we have our hydropower is all on this side. So yes, at the moment, the fossil fuel-based energy is dominant. So more than half within the whole United States is from non-renewable sources with carbon footprints like coal, like natural gas. Understand what's happening over time, and that gives us a ray of hope going forward. The amount of coal generation is only going down. Coal is no longer economically feasible. It's too expensive to make energy out of coal, even with the regulations no longer in place. So the coal slice keeps getting smaller and smaller. Being fair, the natural gas slice is getting bigger. Interestingly, over the last 2 years, which would be 2017 and 2018, the new power plant additions to the grid are actually more in the solar and the wind sectors. So the solar sector and the wind sector are experiencing more growth than the natural gas sector, which really means that with the coal plants slowly shutting down, the renewable energy contribution is going to get bigger and bigger as the wind and solar plants are outpacing the natural gas plants, even with the current regulations. Why is that? Well, people look at power plants in terms of 30-year cost of energy. Although the fossil fuel plants are cheaper to build, the natural gas plant doesn't cost that much to make. It does have a cost to fuel it. So the cost of fueling it over 30 years makes the economics less interesting than a more expensive to build solar farm or wind turbine scenario, where the wind turbine and solar electricity plants will not need fuel for the next 30 years. So again, money is what drives this, and not regulation in this case for the most part. So again, solar power plant or a wind plant will have a lower long-term cost of energy, including the cost of building the plant, than natural gas. So again, going forward, ray of hope, the coal plants are reduced in quantity, and the natural gas expansions are more than offset by increased wind and solar. So there's hope out there, and you're seeing a trend within the information here. Now, why is the solar electricity part the most appealing of the solar products? Well, we know it's an alternative to conventional energy sources. You could certainly make electricity from oil, gas, or coal, but it's the green alternative to that with no carbon footprint and a positive effect on slowing climate change and improving air quality. The renewable energy solutions are less expensive than fossil fuel solutions when seen over the long term, and they're very scalable. You can build a small solar plant, you can build a big solar plant, and we can put a solar plant on something as small as an accessory structure or a rooftop, or something as big as a giant solar farm that covers hundreds of acres and sells the energy to the power company. Now, you're in construction, obviously, as an architect, engineer, real estate developer. In new construction and major renovation projects, there'll be great opportunities to include solar electricity within those projects. Not only does it reduce the operating costs for the owners, it adds value to the buildings and adds the green element that they would desire to do the right thing for the world and their business. The solar electricity systems these days are incredibly durable. Most of the products are 25 to 30-year products, and they require little or no maintenance across those 30 years. So solar electricity has some natural pull, and it's whether it's on the utility scale, where it's a less expensive alternative than fossil fuel plants, to the residential commercial sale structure, where it may represent a cheaper way of powering the building than buying all the energy from the power company. Let's understand the solar resource that we have access to. So that's the amount of energy that's hitting the United States here on this map. What you're seeing is the brighter colors, like down here, is where we have the most sunlight. The darker colors, where we have less sunlight, or even less in Alaska. Now, how does that stack up on a global scale? Well, in terms of renewable energy portion, in terms of the portion of utility power that's renewable, Germany is actually the world leader in terms of solar, and Germany is shown in the quadrant in the bottom right. So Germany has the highest amount of solar electricity on their grid as a percentage, but they have much less sunlight than most of the United States. So the reality is we're in a very good position to leverage solar electricity within the United States, and better position than other countries that have succeeded in getting higher amounts of solar electricity on their grid. So let's talk about all the different ways we're going to see solar electricity out there. We can have utility scale plants, either solar thermal or photovoltaic, that sell electricity to the grid that's green and 100% renewable. Those contracts are very well priced as compared to a similar contract with a fossil fuel-based plant. We can see rooftop systems, residential and commercial rooftops. We'll see accessory structures that have solar on them. And then we also see solutions that don't look like solar panels at all, such as building integrated systems. So let's take a look at some of these so you can picture what they're like. You'll probably run into them in your travels. First, let's look at a utility scale solar thermal power plant. This is probably one of the best examples out there because of what it can do. Let me explain how it works, and then let me explain what it does. You're seeing a giant field of mirrors. The mirrors focus the sunlight on the tower at the top. These plants are in the desert where there's no clouds, so it's easy to focus the mirrors on the tower. These towers run at much too high temperatures for the use of water. So instead, they liquefy salt. So the liquid salt is actually stored in giant caverns that are underneath the arrays. There's big caverns underneath here. And the hot salt stays hot inside the cavern. Now, there's regular turbines like you'd see in a fossil fuel power plant that run water through that liquid salt to make steam to run regular turbines that you would see in a power plant. What's interesting about this plant is because there's a tremendous amount of hot salt stored in the caverns, this can be set up to deliver energy any time of day or night. So for example, if the power company needed electricity from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., and there was plenty of hot salt stored underneath the array, the power plant side of this could be turned on. It would start making steam from the molten salt, and that in turn would make electricity any time of the day or night. This application is rare. You won't see a lot of this because it only works where there's no clouds. And the desert does have that qualification, but otherwise, no. You wouldn't be able to use a technology like this because you can't focus the mirrors outside of the desert. Okay, most of the new utility scale power plants are ground-mounted photovoltaic arrays. Let me show you a small one. This small one also belongs to a vineyard, but it gives you an idea of, you can picture this scaling up. So you're seeing a series of solar modules or solar panels here, and these are in racks that hold them off the ground. And the racks are spaced a certain distance so they don't shade each other. And these generate electricity whenever it's bright out. It doesn't have to be direct sunlight. So these do work on cloudy days. And the electricity these produce, it has to be used immediately. There is no intrinsic storage capability like you saw in the previous slide. However, these are incredibly simple. This would have no moving parts. It's all silicon, glass, and aluminum. And clearly you could build this to any scale you want. You could build 400 acres of this if you wanted. And there are very large scale solar power plants through the US already, and I'd expect to see a whole bunch more. So again, these work where there are clouds and can be scaled as small or as big as necessary and do not have an intrinsic storage capability. Could have to be married with another technology that allows the energy to be stored like storage batteries. Okay. So let's look at a rooftop. Here's a really well-designed residential rooftop you see here. Let me give you a couple of high points of this particular system. It was a new construction. First, you'll note how the shape of the array matches the shape of the surface. So we have a C-shaped surface, and we have a C-shaped array to go along with it. Next, you'll notice the angle. It's a 30-degree south roof. That gives the maximum annual output at the latitude of Long Island or New York City. So it's optimally oriented and optimally pitched. Some other nice details, because this is a good new construction project. You'll notice there's no conduits on the roof, no piping outside that detracts from the aesthetics. This was also mounted in a fashion where there are no bolts through the shingles. This uses an integrated system called standoffs that are installed before the roofing system goes on and are flashed into the roof by the roofer as part of installing the shingles. So here's a best practice as new construction installation. Next, here's an interesting combination. So this is not a net zero building. This is a near zero energy building. It has a vastly lower energy bill than another building similar to it without the renewable energy and energy efficiency elements. This won the AI Long Island Residential Sustainable Design Award many years ago. It's an architect home that was recently put on the market and sold for more than its asking price in less than 3 weeks. The family that had this built for them unfortunately outgrew it. Let me go through some of the neat details this house has. You'll see the infinity pool. What you don't see is underneath the infinity pool is insulation. The ground underneath the pool is at a 53-degree constant temperature. You don't want the gunite pool coupled into the 53-degree ground. So there's insulation underneath this infinity pool. Second, not that you can see it, this has a geothermal system because it's all underground or inside the building The geothermal system heats and cools this project with just electricity. It cools through ductwork. It can heat through its ductwork or its radiant floors. You'll notice the design is contemporary in terms of being straight lines and not gables. South is towards the infinity pool. So we're looking at the south elevation. What you can't see is integrated in the first part of the lower roof are solar panels mounted horizontally. That's the big part of the solar power plant. The second part of the solar electric power plant is on top of the penthouse. So there's 2 solar electric arrays for this project. What you don't see also is a solar pool heater. If you think about it, this penthouse will be throwing shadows on the lower roof behind it, except for summertime. Spring, winter, fall, it will throw shadows on the roof behind it and to the sides of it. There's a solar pool heater that's wrapped around this penthouse that heats the infinity pool you see here. Interesting enough, this pool typically hits 90 Fahrenheit by Memorial Day and holds 90 Fahrenheit all the way until Labor Day with just the solar pool heat. So this is a great application. Its bills are a fraction of what a regular house would be with the same features. And again, it's sold for a premium because it's a gorgeous, no compromise home, and it has a low operating cost and a minimal carbon footprint. So another great project. And this is old. This is maybe 4 or 5 years old. Okay, now let's talk about accessory structures here. There's a great story behind this one. Let me get into it because maybe it'll turn on the light for some of your customers in terms of how things might play. In the Hamptons, they do an idea house every year, and that idea house is used to showcase various things. The developer who was volunteered to build the show house did not want solar on the main house itself. So what you can't see is to the left of this pool house is a massive spec house with a huge south roof that would have made for a very big power plant. The developer was afraid you wouldn't be able to sell the building with that big visible power plant. So I worked with the architect to come up with this pool house design. What you're seeing is one of 3 gables. This is south. There's an east gable here and a west gable here. All 3 gables that are used are triangles. At the time, solar panels were available that were triangular and rectangular, and the architect and I worked it out so that we were able to get a perfect fit on the 3 gables that we cared about. Candidly, this is a very small system, especially compared to what the main house could have held. Interestingly, the guests were focused on this electricity system. It drew more attention than anything else in the house, whether it be the terrazzo floors or the gold fixtures in the bathroom, etc. So after this particular exercise, the spec house builder decided to add big solar arrays to all of the projects to have the extra appeal to the buyers. This was also featured in El Decor magazine as a very attractive installation. But again, by starting with accessory structure, we got the builder to come around to doing solar in a big way in all of its projects. More accessory structures. So this pool house you see on the right is from the same architect as the pool house in the previous slide. You're seeing a 2-car garage with high output panels. You're seeing a 3-car garage with high output panels. So clearly, pool houses, garages, accessory structures, carports would make good solar candidates in addition to hopefully the main structure itself. Building integrated systems. Now, this is the holy grail in some people's mind in terms of something you can hope for in terms of having the roof and the solar be one and the same. There's a little bit more to it than meets the eye. What you're seeing in this picture is a great building integrated system. This is a barrel-shaped metal roof on a fancy private school on Long Island. And because it's a barrel, if we tried to use regular solar panels, we create a jagged appearance where each row of panels would have a different pitch. So the panels towards the bottom would be facing, let's say, this way, and the panels towards the top would be facing that way. Really unsightly kind of jagged look. And unfortunately, this school doesn't have the option of doing something unattractive because the architectural review board and its neighbors. At the time, building integrated laminate was available that actually sticks into the pans of the standing seam aluminum roof. It's a flexible material. There's no glass involved and no silicon crystals, so it conforms to the curvature of this roof. The wiring had to be hidden under these raceways you see here, which are also a snow guard detail, wiring raceway and snow guard. So this is a beautiful installation. The client is very happy with it. It's had no real problems over all the years it's been there. It's withstood some pretty solid hailstorms. Unfortunately, two things. One, the power output is considerably less than you get with a solar panel system. So had we been allowed to use solar panels and had it been aesthetically acceptable, then we would have delivered potentially twice as much energy as this integrated system. But since those weren't allowed, that was not an option. Second, the manufacturer of these laminates has gone out of business. Other people have tried to take up where that manufacturer left off. But long and short, when you're dealing in a niche market like building integrated systems, it's hard to be successful when you have a mainstream in solar panels that's mature, constantly lowering costs, constantly improving product. So here I'd say we have a beautiful installation that works really well. But in terms of designing a project around a solution like this, I would probably use caution, knowing that the manufacturer might not be around, the product might not be around, and there may be issues with the product down the road that you're not aware of. Now, here's another place that the integrated solution worked nicely, the laminates. This is a gym in an architectural review board controlled neighborhood that does not allow solar panels. You're looking at the south elevation. This building's exposed from the south, east, and the west. So there really is no way to have a solar panels installation here that's acceptable to the architectural review board. Fortunately, there was architectural review board is open to a standing seam aluminum roof. Turns out that laminates themselves are very deep blue color. So the blue color of this roof matches the laminates exactly. So it's extremely hard to tell that this building is solar powered. If you have a really keen eye, you will note the laminates are fixed length. You can see a slight line through here as the laminate ends and the roof begins. But again, incredibly subtle. No one knows it's there. You'll notice the ice guard detail. The surface of the laminates is slippery, so you want to make sure the snow doesn't slide off. Very successful project, but again, these kind of products have hazards because they're not mainstream. They don't have established manufacturers with deep pockets and long track records behind them. Okay, here's a more practical building integrated solution. This was for the LEED Platinum TD banks. The TD banks, unfortunately, have a design where the roof shades itself. In elevation view, you'll see an inverted T where the clear story actually throws shadows on the main flat roofs. Fortunately, the bank has a drive-through off to one side that's not shaded by the clear story, and the driveway can be used to hold the solar power plant. So this is the canopy of the TD bank drive-through. As part of developing this with TD, I can tell you, number one, it does provide shelter. The automated teller drawer is on this side. The automated cash machine is on this side. These solar panels are glazed into a skylight type system where they're completely watertight. So this represents shelter. Second, you have the solar panels themselves. Not only are they designed to be glazed in, but they also have spaces between the cells where daylight can go through. So you're getting a daylighting effect underneath the canopy. So we have shelter and daylight. And of course, the primary purpose is to deliver energy to help the bank meet its LEED Platinum objective. So this is a great project. Some things here are a little deceiving. Some of the heavy metal structure you see here is not necessary to support the canopy. It's necessary to prevent oversized vehicles from damaging the canopy if they try to use the cash machine or the teller drawer. So this is a great application. In your mind, picture awnings, picture pergolas, picture large glazed structures like a train station. Instead of smoking the glass to keep the sunlight out, you could certainly turn it into electricity with this kind of a building integrated solution. This is a little bit more mainstream than what you saw before, but still not true that these manufacturers are established, stable, and well funded. So these work really well, but the people who make these panels have changed hands a couple times. Still, though, more stable and predictable than some of the other building integrated solutions like roof tiles that you'll hear about. Okay, so what makes for a valid solar project? We need certain prerequisites to be met in order to really be able to make this happen. So, of course, first and foremost is exposure. If we don't have sunlight hitting the part of the project, then it's not going to make a lot of sense. We can install a lot of fancy solar panels, but we won't get a lot of meaningful output from them. Second, we need the right thing to attach them to. Let's call it the structure for the sake of argument. And there's two parts. The first part is a surface that's solar compatible and durable enough to work well with the solar electricity system. The structural weights are typically on the light side, so most buildings are framed adequately to begin with to hold solar, but of course the engineering has to be done to make sure it is able to hold the weight of the system and the uplift from the system. Let me spend a longer on the roof. So a commercial system on a flat roof could last 30 to 40 years, but flat roofs typically last 20 years. So you want to come up with a solution where once the system's installed on the new roof will last at least as long as the system. So choices include standing seam aluminum or panelized standing seam aluminum. That gives a great surface to mount the panels to and will outlast the system. Second, you could go with a PVC type roof. Those are very good 50-year solutions. They're expensive, but they work well. Also provides a good basis on a flat roof. And probably the most expensive of all is the fluid applieds. Those work beautifully on flat roofs and will definitely outlive the solar panels that we've attached to them. What you don't want to do is install a 20-year roof with a 40-year system. That doesn't make sense. Now, we want our the client or the owner to have a long-term focus. If the client wanted to build a building and sell it as quickly as possible, the client may short-sightedly say, well, all I care about is how cheaply I can build it, not what it's worth on the far end. So if your client's in it for the long term, the solar will make a lot more sense to them. It's also possible your client may be in it for the short term, but understands he's going to get a lot more value, or she's going to get a lot more value out of the project with the solar installed. As an example, there's a company that's building net zero spec houses on Long Island. They're all zero energy buildings with solar and geothermal. And those spec homes are commanding a huge premium. So in the case of that real estate developer, he's making a larger investment, but recouping a big multiple of that on the ultimate sale of the project. You want to be working in an area with favorable utility and government policies. So that varies throughout the United States, and your local integrators will be the ones to fill you in on what's available. But for example, you have to be allowed to connect the systems to the grid. That's on the utility side. How you'll be billed with solar power on your side of the meter, that's on the utility side. Government policies can include incentives or disincentives in terms of things you're not allowed to do, but you have to understand how the local situation plays into how you would implement solar electricity in your projects. And again, in the worst possible utility and government policies, it may not be true that you move forward with it. So there was a time, for example, where Florida did not allow clients to connect their solar electricity systems to the grid. So despite how much sunlight they had, that was an industry that wasn't going anywhere. That's changed. So again, your local integrators will be most familiar with that. I'm only familiar with the incentives in New York State and the utility regulations. Without being short-sighted, we also have to think about the way the client will buy the system. It's not true that every client has the disposable capital or credit to buy the renewable energy elements for the project. The different methods include financing. One of the new methods that's pretty well accepted is PACE financing, where the renewable energy is actually financed into the property tax bill of the property. That way the debt moves to the new owner if the property is sold. However, you do have certain types of client situations that are very hard to finance. Most obvious would be the clients that don't pay income tax. In that situation, the huge income tax breaks that are available would not be available to that type of a client, which would bring the net price higher because there's no tax incentives to apply. So a not-for-profit or a business that doesn't show a profit on their books or pay income tax might find that solar electricity doesn't make much financial sense because they're paying the full price with little or no incentive. Yes, there are complicated strategies of third-party ownership that can help with that. So for example, a not-for-profit could have a beautiful new roof, and it could have a third party, a for-profit, that buys the system, installs it on their roof, and sells the energy to the not-for-profit at a discounted rate. Then at the end of the term, the not-for-profit could buy that system from the for-profit, and it would be theirs for the rest of the term. So again, there's got to be a way to purchase it, and it's easier or harder depending on how much credit, capital, and income tax liability your client has. Okay, now, In terms of best practices, first of all, we need to think about maximizing the exposure. This is a combination of roof plan and site plan, and we want to make sure that where the solar panels are hopefully exposed all day, every day, all year. Solar real estate, we want a large amount of surface area relative to the enclosed volume of the building to be able to match the solar production with the consumption of the building. So a huge building with a little solar array, let's say a skyscraper with 200 usable square feet on the roof, that 200 square feet is not going to make a real dent in the consumption of the skyscraper. On the flip side, a ranch house with a big roof and only one floor underneath will have plenty of solar real estate if properly designed. Next, we want to talk about solar orientation. The maximum output over the course of the year is always in a southerly orientation because the United States is in the northern hemisphere. So typically a south roof will generate the most energy in the course of the year. The optimal pitch will vary depending on what latitude your project is. The further north the project, the steeper the roof should be. The further south the project is, the flatter the south roof should be. This is because the sun is higher in the sky in the southern parts of the US and lower in the sky in the northern parts of the US. So for example, 8 on 12 is pretty much ideal for New York City and Long Island. I would think in Maine, 9 on 12 or 10 on 12 would work better. And perhaps in Florida, 5 on 12 would work better. Now, don't always assume that south is the right answer. Even though it produces the maximum annual production, it might not have the highest financial value. So for example, if your utility charged more in the afternoon than they did in the morning, you might want a west-facing array where it generates most of its power later in the day. It won't make as much energy as a south-facing system in the course of the day, but the value of the energy it produces could be much higher if rates are much higher in the afternoons. So again, steeper pitches further north, shallower pitches further south. Southern exposure, southern pitch delivers the most output, and you might want to vary it from there depending on how the utility is billing for the energy. You want to think about longevities. We talked about the roofing system. So again, even the most basic electricity systems will last 20 to 25 years. The good ones, 30 to 40 years. You do not want to have to dismount and remount that system within its life. It's a lot of extra labor, a lot of extra work. So the perfect world, you have a roofing system that will outlast the solar. And there are some that will outlast several iterations. So for example, if it was standing seam aluminum, that's going to last through 2 or 3 systems. If it lasts 120 years, that's 3 systems of 40 years each on the same roof. Now, it's important to work with your local and experienced resources. Within your area, hopefully you can find resources that have extensive new construction experience, great references, bankable results, and be able to provide you with a solution that works beautifully for your client so that everyone's happy with the final result. So again, do your homework. There should be local players that can provide the solar electricity without compromising your project, that have the right track record to give you the confidence to have them join your team. So since architects are a visual lot on the whole, perhaps picturing some of these projects and talking them through will give you an idea of how things work from a solar electricity standpoint. We're going to go through a residential retrofit, a new construction, a commercial retrofit, an interesting one, and even a solar neighborhood. I'll explain that in a little bit. Okay, let's start with residential retrofit. This is a project that's been installed since 2008, I believe. It's never required a service call or maintenance of any kind. This system has offset 100% of the electric consumption of this house, meaning that the owner is paying about $12 a month to be connected to the grid, and that's his entire electricity expenditure. A couple things to note here. First of all, you note it's great exposure here. You don't see any trees. That's great. We are looking at a west roof. So this is not a south. It just happens the way the house sits has a west roof. The chimney itself that you see here is going to throw shadows until about noon on this part of the west roof. So the panels that were placed here would produce a lot less than the rest of the panels that are either south of the roof or south of that roof. Now, another thing you'll see is this is a cedar roof, so there's no bolts bolting the panels into the cedar. Instead, what you see is a series of standoffs and flashings that were installed prior to the shingle roof and the solar panels going on. What that does is it allows the cedar roof to do what it's supposed to do to hold water. Cedar swells when it gets wet, it shrinks when it gets dry, and it has to breathe. Any attempt to pass a bolt through that over the long haul could lead to splitting and cracking of the shingles and loss of water tightness. So it's a best practices approach on a cedar roof. And again, 100% success from the client standpoint. Interestingly enough, maybe you have clients like this too. Their primary home is an apartment building where they really have no control of their utility bills or their carbon footprint. This is where the owner decided to make his impact on a secondary home to eliminate its electric bill and reduce its carbon footprint. Now let's go into a new construction. This is a residential net zero, in fact. It's a ranch house. I'll detail this in the case studies further on. What I want to point out, a couple things. In these aerial photos, south is always directly to the bottom of the picture. As such, this gable faces southeast. You'll notice the small amount of surface area that's used here for the solar panels. Well, the reason this works is that this is a very well insulated ranch with passive solar elements. It doesn't have a lot of enclosed volume, and then enclosed volume doesn't require that much energy. So we're able to offset 100% of the energy consumption of this building with just part of one gable. Now let's go into a commercial now. This is a very interesting case we see here. This is a building that belongs to a very successful business where their product is actually warehoused in the back of this building. So the warehouse space essentially goes from here all the way back to the rear of the building. The office space is limited to the very front of the building you see here. Now, the consumption of the building is relatively low because in the back, we have simply bulbs and fans, and the office space is relatively small in the front of the building. So they have one system, the one that's pictured in the middle here. That system in the middle offsets 100% of electricity consumption in the building. So that's connected to the meter that this building buys its electricity from, and that meter year after year does not move forward because over the course of the year, the central array generates as much electricity as the whole building uses. Now, here's something interesting on the outer wings. So you'll see two more arrays. It's, I guess, this one and this one. This is the east and west arrays. What are they there for? Well, within this jurisdiction, there's from time to time, the power company solicits for people to sell green energy from their rooftops into the grid. So in fact, the two outer systems that you see here, the one that's on the west side of the building and the one that's on the east side of the building, are selling energy to the power company under a fixed price 20-year contract. So basically, that's a new source of income for the client versus the center system, which is one that eliminates the energy cost of the building. What made all this possible? Well, the first thing is the client was planning to buy a new roof anyway and had the foresight and money to buy a reflective white fluid applied roof. The white roofs run cooler, increase the solar output. They also are brighter. Another reason to increase the solar output. Plus, the owner is got plenty of capital and plenty of income tax liability. So he was able to capture the tax credits and accelerated depreciation on all the systems you see here. So in the case of this company, the IRS ended up picking up over 60% of the cost of these systems in a form of a federal tax credit and an accelerated depreciation deduction. So the client's super happy. He's got a new source of revenue from his rooftop, which he bought new, his roof surface, and he's not subject to rate increases because the center system offsets the electric consumption of the building. So this is a winner, but this was a retrofit with a new roof involved. So again, very successful implementation. And no, it is not fair to assume that the power companies all throughout the United States offer programs that would buy energy from the rooftop of the building. And yes, that energy that's being sold is on a separate meter than the one that the electric company uses to sell electricity to the building. So again, two systems in total, one that stops the meter, one that sells electricity to the power company. Okay, let's look at this up close a little bit. What's really going on? That picture was kind of from a distance. And what you're seeing here is the center array, which is the one that stops the electric meter for the building. Let me point out the installation technique. This is a ballasted system that's held down by its own weight. This avoids rooftop penetrations, which you'd like to avoid in the perfect world on a commercial flat roof. And the engineering was done by outside third-party engineers to confirm that at 130 miles an hour sustained wind, this system will stay down on that roof. Also, the structural engineering was done to make sure that the weight of the system could be supported by the underlying structure. So this is a large-scale ballasted system. The panels have a slight tilt to the southwest, directly to the south. So instead of sitting completely horizontally, they're pitched at 10 degrees to the south. Higher pitches would deliver more energy, but would have higher uplifts, and you'd have to space the rows of panels out further to prevent shading. So this 10 degrees is basically ideal in terms of the most amount of energy we can deliver from the flat roof. And again, without penetrations of any kind because it's ballasted. One of the two cash machines system here, that's the west one that sells electricity to the power company. The other one is here on top of the upper roof. You'll notice the bank of inverters mounted to the bulkhead here. That converts the output from the outer systems into utility-grade electricity, which is being sold to the power company. So you get a great example, but remember, some prerequisites for MET. Great exposure, new roof, client is in it from the long term, client has plenty of income tax liability, client has plenty of capital, and we have favorable policies in place to make this happen. Okay, now let's take a look at something interesting. In the east end of Long Island, the municipalities are especially sensitive to the impacts of climate change. This is the Hamptons, which is in a hurricane zone and very susceptible to flooding through sea level rise and climate change. So the building code was modified to go to what they call the HERS stretch code, Home Efficiency Rating System stretch code. So these buildings are more efficient than the New York State code requires. And because of the HERS stretch code, the bigger houses need renewable energy elements to achieve a score sufficient to pull their building permit. So because there's a lot of new construction in the Hamptons, these new codes have been in place for a while. We're now seeing whole neighborhoods sprouting up where they all have renewable energy elements because of the building code. As much as I like to say these owners are all doing it to be green, in fact, a lot of it is simply to meet the building code to build these projects. Now you'll see two different approaches here. It would be my belief that the architect involved in this project did not know that solar was a requirement and did not think about how to make the roof lines work optimally with solar panels installed. What you're really seeing are three very irregular arrays that match three irregular gables with obstacles such as skylights through them. So this works, but it's not terribly attractive. And it's not a particularly good fill. There's a lot of leftover roof that doesn't have panels. I have to say the architect here had a slightly better idea. What you're seeing are two essentially rectangular gables split in half. Nice clean installation, no unusually shaped arrays. So here's perhaps a better installation caused by the architect being more familiar with knowing that the solar panels were required. So there's some visuals for you for different types of projects. Let's move on to decarbonization. So that's really why I'm delivering this. I'm hoping that this program will help each of you make your projects greener. And by lowering the carbon emissions from the construction sector, we can make a big difference in terms of slowing climate change and improving air quality. So with solar electricity, you'll see that partial reductions are very common. So for example, you could have a building where some or all the electricity consumption was displaced by solar. What does that do? That eliminates the carbon footprint on the utility end as they burn a certain amount of coal and natural gas to provide electricity to that building. However, very often it's only partial. I mean, the customer is still buying some electricity, which won't be completely green in most cases. And a lot of the buildings that have solar power also have a big fossil fuel footprint. So if you had solar power in your climate that required a lot of heat and you had fossil fuel based heat, well, the solar power has helped in one direction, but the carbon footprint of the fuel used in the building is still there and on an ongoing basis. So in order to eliminate the carbon footprint altogether, we'd have to get rid of the fossil fuel altogether on site and not consume any energy from the power company, which could be carbon intensive. Now, it stands to reason the more efficient the building, the better all this is going to work. So for example, if you had a building that was a real guzzler, it'd be hard to have enough roof on that guzzler to offset all of its consumption. If we can make the buildings progressively more efficient, as in less energy consumed per square foot, now we can get to the point where we have enough rooftop to offset that consumption. So it definitely adds feasibility of the project to have an efficient building. Now, truth be told, in certain jurisdictions, in certain cases, you can elect to buy green energy from a third party that's delivered to you by the local power company. That's called an ESCO, the companies that do that. And big examples of this would be companies like Microsoft and Google and Apple, who are committed to buying renewable energy to offset their data centers. And there, it won't be true that that tech giant owns the solar farm, for example. They have a contract to buy that green energy from the farm, and that green energy is transported to them by the local utility. So that works really well, but understand it's not free energy for Google or Microsoft or whoever owns it, or the not-for-profit who might choose to go down the same road. And no, it's not available in every jurisdiction, the ability to choose who supplies the energy that the local utility delivers to your home or business. However, I just want to put that on the table. Maybe you have a project that's in the dark, doesn't get enough sunlight. Maybe an ESCO is a valid choice, or a building that's not solar compatible might be a valid choice to be carbon free on your electric without having the on-site production. And yes, the LEED system does allow you to use a long-term contract with an ESCO instead of having on-site solar, for example, to contribute to the energy and atmosphere section. So again, we want to get rid of the fuel and want to make all the electricity local or buy all the electricity from a green source. Of course, it's usually more cost-effective to own the solar than to buy it from a third party. Okay, so let's go through a near zero energy home first. This is the partial reduction example. This is a great story right here. This was also the winner of the AA Long Island Residential Sustainable Design Award. Here's the history. The house that was originally here, this is in Long Beach, New York, was wiped out by Hurricane Sandy. So basically the owners said, no, we're not going to move. We're going to have the architect build us a house that has resistance in terms of the floodplain. The floodplain is running right through here essentially, and has the minimal carbon footprint, so we can be part of tomorrow's solution and hopefully slow down the arrival of the next hurricane or major disaster. So let me go through some of the elements here. You'll see a shed roof. This allows a tremendous amount of solar panels, all facing south in this case. As you can see, exposure is completely wide open. The area below the floodplain has got no mechanicals, no outlets, no ductwork. Essentially, there's a garage, a porch, and a foyer. And the foyer has both stairs that lead up into the living space on the main and upper levels, and an elevator. The owner is going to eventually need to use an elevator to get down the stairs. And the building has an elevator that's hoisted from the top, so the mechanicals of the elevator are not below the floodplain. The geothermal heating and cooling system is actually mounted horizontally right above the garage, right above the floodplain. So everything that you care about is above the floodplain. Now let's talk about results. Before I do that, I have to introduce the fact that the client has three things that they require from their end, and this is the reason it's not a full net zero home. First and foremost, the health of the owner requires very long hot showers, and a fossil fuel solution like natural gas, which is available there, is a great way to make 100 gallons of water to clip for this customer's purpose. That's a requirement, not an option. Next, gas stove. Third, gas dryer. None of that's negotiable. So this has solar electricity that offsets 100% of electricity consumption. This customer has not bought electricity from the power company since this house was built, but it does have a natural gas bill for the hot water heater, for the stove, and for the dryer. Again, client is ecstatic, and it would be net zero had the special requirements for the hot water, stove, and dryer been in place. And yes, there's enough roof here where we could have offset the consumption of a regular hot water heater, electric stove, and electric dryer, no problem, but that doesn't fit what the owner wanted. Very successful project. It's called the Sandy Cottage. It's been written up in several newspapers. Okay, now let's go to the all-electric side of life. So a decarbonized building would have to be all electric, right? If we're bringing in fuel, we're bringing a carbon footprint with it. So we want to, first of all, make the building as efficient as possible. Let's reduce the energy consumption to the absolute minimum so we can offset all of it, let's say with a rooftop electricity system. How do we do that? Well, technology's moved a long way. We certainly have new things available to us like spray foam, like better air barriers, technology to model how buildings perform under various weather. So for example, now we can perfect an envelope where we didn't really have the ability to do that before. Choose our glazing to reject the right amount of sunlight and to keep the heat inside the house in the winter and outside the house in the summer. We have access to advanced building controls. We can certainly have a business or a home that's smart, turns off things that aren't needed when they aren't used, and even technologies that can take daylight and essentially make it consistent through a building by using small amounts of artificial light. Heating and cooling systems only become more efficient. And we can get to some finer points now. For example, thermal bridges are a fine point in that you could have a conditioned space that's coupled into ground that's at constant temperature and find that, oh my goodness, in the winter, we are heating the ground below the building. In the summer, we're cooling the ground below the building. So we want to eliminate that thermal bridge where what we're trying to condition and what's outside of that are perfectly isolated. Another example would be, for example, a steel member that exists inside the building and it's expressed outside the building. That would be a thermal bridge also. That's a finer point. If we're looking to make an efficient building, we would eliminate the thermal bridges. Another fine point that we're aware of now are stack effects. In taller buildings, air tends to be sucked in at the lowest level and exhausted out at the highest level. Well, that is not only uncomfortable, but also increases the amount of energy it takes to condition the building because we have a constant inflow of outside air at the bottom and exhausting and conditioned air at the top. Now, we can add passive solar elements, just like we saw in the Native American example. So passive solar elements like overhangs in the right places will cut down the cooling load in the summer and reduce the heating load in the winter. Again, it's passive. They're not moving parts, they're not moving electrons, they're building features that make the building more efficient. Similar for daylighting. The more quality daylighting we get in the building, the less artificial light we're going to need. And the technology in daylighting is much more advanced than ever in terms of figuring out if you're going to have glare issues and getting uniform brightness as the daylight leaks into the building. Very sophisticated. But again, those kind of things can be built into the building and will help conserve energy forever. We have to avoid the use of fossil fuel-based heating systems. That's a permanent carbon footprint and a permanent operating cost for the owner. So again, all electric efficient buildings are key. The most efficient buildings will meet what's called the passive house standard out of Germany. So they've come up with a standard that defines what's the least amount of energy consumption per square foot that we can get to. That's called the passive house standard. Now, these houses have to be made in special ways. These are not your regular stick-built frame structures. This is actually made out of structurally insulated panel system, SIPS. So the whole exterior of the building, the roof deck, everything else you see here is actually plywood sandwiched over foam. So there is no way for air to leak between stud bays or anything like that. They're sealed at all the joints between the SIPS panels, and it provides a very high R value, very low air leakage. Now, this is not a standard construction technique. You'd have to learn how to use it effectively, but it has a lot of other side benefits. Great noise isolation from the outside and room to room if done correctly. This particular one, in order to meet the passive house standard, had to get down to less than 0.5 air exchanges an hour. That's a great number. For example, the code in the Hamptons is 2 air exchanges an hour, and that's difficult enough to do. To get down to a half air exchange an hour requires a very, very tight envelope. So this does do that, and it took quite a bit of work after the SIPS was completed to be able to seal every last leak to get it down to that half an air exchange an hour. Let me talk about air exchanges. In the old days, builders used to believe that a leaky house was a comfortable house, meaning plenty of fresh air coming in all the time is the right answer. Well, think again. In the summer, the air coming in could be hot and humid, So you have to run the cooling system real hard to offset that damp air coming in. In the winter, cold, dry air is coming in, creating drafts, static inside. You really don't want that cold, dry air coming in anyway. And of course, it makes the comfort system work harder in both cases. So what you'd really like to do is build tight and ventilate right. That's the new catchphrase. So the building itself should have the least amount of intrinsic leakage. And then through the use of energy recovery ventilators, we can ventilate the right amount and precondition the air coming in with the air going out. So again, we don't want to build leaky buildings. We want to build tight buildings. They're more comfortable, build tight and ventilate right. And of course, if you're looking for the standard in terms of how efficient can we be, let's look at the passive house standard out of Germany. And yes, it's true. This house is a net zero with a very small solar array and a very small solar hot water system. Why? Because it's a super efficient building for the passive house standard. So you know what the high water mark is now. So let me go through a benefits to this net zero, zero carbon buildings, because you might have to offer this to your clients. First of all, zero ongoing carbon footprint. If we're not consuming any energy, there will be no carbon footprint associated with this building. There's no fossil fuel going into the building, so we'll have no risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, puffback, explosions. That won't be part of the mix. And the client doesn't have to worry about rising fuel prices either. The client's not buying electricity, he's not buying fuel. Now, the net zero building should be ideally in an on-grid environment. Let me explain. It's totally normal for a electricity system to generate much more energy during the summer than the winter. But if you're in a climate that has a heating season, then you'll find you need a lot of energy in the heating season to keep the building warm. And typically there's a lot less sunlight in the winter than the summer. So the grid can be used to accept your surpluses all summer where the solar electricity output exceeds the building's consumption, and then use the grid to take that energy back in the winter when you need it to heat the building and you don't have that much sunlight at your disposal. That's through the net metering process. Also, too, think about it on a day-to-day basis. If you had sunlight all day and no sun at night, which is the case, then you have to figure out how to store energy during the day to use at night. Again, with electricity grid and net metering, it's not necessary. So with net metering, you can turn the meter backwards and forwards, so it doesn't matter when you make the energy and when you use it. So on-grid is ideal. And understand you might have customers who like to cut the cord and not do business with utility at all. You might want to think twice about that. In a climate where summer and winter are very different, like here in New York, the amount of electricity you'd have to store from the summer, keep the building all winter, would be cost prohibitive and would be way too massive to fit within the project itself. So again, you might use batteries on a daytime, nighttime solution, but not to store a whole summer's worth of surplus to carry you through the winter. That, the grid is your best route for that. Now let's talk about the financial benefits here. Well, assuming there's residential net metering in place in your jurisdiction where you work, the project will have an almost zero utility bill residentially, which means that the residential homeowner will pay a monthly service fee to be connected to the grid, but is not buying any energy at all. So that's a fixed price, minimal charge type of bill. Commercial is a little different. Commercial meters have what they call demand charges and energy charges. So a net zero commercial building will have no ongoing energy charges, but will have demand charges as before. So the demand meter captures the peak 15 minutes of the consumption of the commercial building, and that will be billed by the power company. And even if you have solar, you should still expect that, because in the middle of the night, you can be drawing energy from the grid. And you could certainly have a hot, humid day where it gets completely dark from thunderstorms, but you still have the air conditioning on. So again, recapping, significant financial benefit, significant benefit to the environment, and significantly benefited by being connected to the grid. Now let's get to some terms here. So we need a power plant that generates the energy for the project. That's typically going to be a solar electricity system, and it produces energy in the form of electricity as measured in kilowatt hours. Now, where does that electricity go? The biggest consumer in most buildings is the comfort system. Probably depends on the use of the building and what part of the United States you're in, but in general, we're seeing the heating and cooling consumes the lion's share of the energy in many climates. And we want to heat and cool with electricity as efficiently as possible. So geothermal heating and cooling has been known as the most efficient way to condition a building, and that's been true since the 1970s. So we have a great way of heating and cooling the project with electricity using just the ground below the project. As a side effect of the geothermal heating and cooling, it'll also make some domestic hot water. An alternative to a geothermal comfort system is an air source heat pump comfort system, where instead of exchanging heat between the building and the ground, it exchanges heat between the building and the air surrounding the building. Candidly, it's a lot less efficient than a geothermal system, especially at the ends of the spectrum. So if you lived in a very moderate climate, and let's say the record high was 90 and the record low was 50, the air source heat pumps would be pretty efficient in that mode. When you live in a broader climate range, the air source heat pumps are a lot less efficient because, for example, when it's really cold out, it's hard to squeeze heat out of cold air to heat a building. But the geothermal system is not tied to the air outside, so it has no idea how cold it is outside and can generate its full amount of heat no matter how cold it is outdoors. Understand, too, the air source heat pumps are outdoor equipment, so you'd have a faster replacement schedule, a heavier maintenance schedule, and, of course, the aesthetic and noise aspects of having outdoor equipment either on the roof or sitting on the parcel. Now, if you did go with the air source heat pumps, too, because they're less efficient, you typically would need more roof space to offset their consumption than with a geothermal heating and cooling system. So the metric we're trying to get to is where the annual consumption of the building and all the loads within it, the comfort system, the lights, et cetera, that annual consumption is less than or equal to the annual solar output. If that's achieved, you have a net zero building, which is the best thing you can do from an environmental perspective. And for your client, probably the best thing you can do from a financial perspective, since they're now basically immune to rate increases, immune to fuel price increases, and have the lowest operating cost humanly possible. Now, I need to get into some more of the bits and pieces that go with this, but that's the underlying concepts. Let's take a look at commercial net zero from on top so you can visualize how it works on a commercial building. The first thing you'll note is that the solar array is basically a full fill. The solar array essentially goes edge to edge on this roof. This is a combination of two things. One is the fact that it has geothermal heating and cooling. Everything that's comfort system related is either inside the building or buried underneath the parcel. So there's no rooftop mechanicals here to use up roof space. And it uses up a lot of roof space because those mechanicals not only throw shadows, they also need service clearances. So you lose a lot of space to rooftop mechanicals. Next, we did lose some space. We lost some space to this facade right here and where the clients enter. We lose some space to some vents from the inside, but otherwise we got a very large array on a relatively small building. This particular one is a net zero hardware store that's part of a family-owned chain that's multi-generational. They're in it for the long haul. They want to be green and they want to remain competitive. The net zero building does exactly that. In its first year of operation, its energy bill was $144. That's pretty amazing for a good-sized hardware store. Okay, now, what are the benefits to the owner of this net zero building? Of course, the huge financial savings, but understand that in turn translates into a high property value. A simple metric is, at least residentially, is an energy improvement. Its annual savings in energy gets a 20 times multiplier on the sale price of the house. So, for example, if you put in the technology, reduce the energy bill by $1,000, the house is worth $20,000 more. Why is that? It's simple metrics in terms of the home buyer. The home buyer is looking at a mortgage bill, a property tax bill, and an energy bill. The elimination of the energy bill would allow a much higher mortgage for the same much higher mortgage for the same monthly outlay. So a net zero home is worth more because it has no utility bill. So you can have more mortgage and less utility bill, representing a more valuable home. Commercially, it's much simpler. Commercial properties are valued based on P&L statements. And when you have no energy bills or minimal energy bills, all the income is then profit, or as much of it as possible as profit. So they have very high, attractive P&Ls, which gives them a very higher value. The immunity to rate increases is very valuable too. Some businesses are very susceptible to little changes like energy prices. If you're working on tight margins, like the hardware business we saw before, you really care about, wow, I want to maintain my profit. And if energy prices go up, that could kill that particular profit. We want to be immune to that. The side benefits to the owner is the zero carbon footprint that we've spoken about. The better indoor air quality. Now that comes out of that build tight, ventilate right philosophy and the geothermal heating and cooling systems. Between the two, you're getting great indoor air quality, no flame-based equipment in the building, and efficient ventilation just to the right amount using energy recovery ventilators. And they'll be free of drafts because these buildings are fairly well sealed, and the temperature will be very uniform throughout the building. And as far as operations and maintenance, the solar array will require very little maintenance, if any. For example, on a flat roof system, perhaps occasional cleaning is about it, but fairly maintenance-free. And a geothermal system is probably the most maintenance-free of all heating and cooling systems when installed correctly. So, for example, in a regular flame-based systems, you've got flues, you've got injectors, you've got tanks. And in the cooling side, you've got outdoor compressors with outdoor refrigerant runs, etc. The geothermal system, the only maintenance is pulling the washable filters out of the air handlers, washing them in the sink, and putting them back in a couple times a year. So very low maintenance costs. And then recall, or I haven't said it yet, the geothermal system properly designed will last 25 plus years. That wouldn't be true of air conditioning and regular outdoor mechanicals. So again, you're saving money on your energy, you're saving the planet, and you're saving your long-term operating costs, both in terms of maintenance and eventual replacement. Now, the specific example part depends on the business your client is in or what their goals are. I certainly have a few clients that did it strictly to set a civic example or to differentiate themselves. So that TD Bank example I showed you, that would be a case where did they really need to do that to be profitable? Probably not. A bank is a bank. However, to be different and special as compared to other banks, they did that very effectively. They differentiated themselves with that. I'm sure you can think of other businesses that differentiate themselves that way. Also, some people want to just set the civic example. I want future generations to follow in our footsteps. I have to set the example if no one else will. I certainly have a few of those out there. And of course, there are the badges. So if you have a client that wants to have a LEED certification, the net zero building will have a pretty high score out of the blocks for that. Ditto, if you're going for an Energy Star, what we're doing to go net zero will also help the Energy Star rating. And then, of course, if we have the HER stretch code or a place where the building code demands renewable energy, we have that taken care of with the net zero building. So a lot of benefits, hard and soft. And I definitely have cases, and think about your customers for a second, your clients, that at the beginning, all they care about is the dollars. That's the green they really care about. Okay, what's my return on investment for this improved insulation? What's my return on investment for the geothermal heating and cooling, and so forth? In other words, being smart with their money. Yes, it probably starts there 9 times out of 10. However, it's not unusual down the road after the client's made the investment and is reaping the benefits. Now it's time to tout how green you are, that you did the right thing, etc. So again, there's shades of green. They all work. Your customer might start with the Ben Franklin shade and then go to the green, good for the environment shade after it's all paid for, installed, and up and running. But it's both needs are being met with these zero energy buildings. Now, geothermal heating and cooling, not many of you are, I think, would be familiar with this. And the explanation would be very long if you got into the nitty gritty. But the part that you need to understand is the geothermal system takes electricity and uses it to move heat to different places. So for example, in the summer, when we're cooling the building, instead of sending the heat into, let's say, 100 Fahrenheit outside air, we're sending the heat into, let's say, 60-degree ground underneath us. Way more efficient to move the heat that way into the cool ground than into the hot air. The leap of faith is in the opposite direction. We're trying to heat the building from this cool ground. Well, understand, you can refrigerate the ground and heat the building in turn, which is how the heating cycle works. So case in point would be your refrigerator. You have the cavity that's ice cold, and on the back of the fridge, you have the hot coils. So the heat is being pumped out of the cavity to the hot coils in the back of the fridge. So in the winter, imagine the cavity is the ground below your project, and the hot coils are what's inside the building. Now, here's the magic in this. As I said, in the cooling cycle, it's pretty obvious why it's more efficient to push the heat into the ground, which is cool, than into the hot air. Here's what happens in the heating cycle. It's pretty amazing. By chilling the ground, we get a multiplication factor on the energy fed to the heat pumps. So if we give the geothermal heat pump 1 kilowatt of electricity, it will draw 5 kilowatts of energy out of the ground and give you 6 kilowatts of heat inside the building. So that's a 6-to-1 mechanical advantage. That number will probably get higher over time. But let's take the old example, the electric baseboard. That's resistance. That's 1-for-1. You give it 1 kilowatt of electricity, you get 1 kilowatt of heat. And yes, where energy rates are high, electric baseboards could be prohibitive compared to burning fuel. With the geothermal and its 5 or 6-to-1 mechanical advantage, you're very happy to use electricity because every bit that you either make or you buy from the power company is complemented by 5 times as much coming out of the ground permanently and for free. So it's great technology. It's been around since the 70s. The Department of Energy said it was the most efficient system back then. It's still the case today, but it's not that widely understood or widely deployed. Hopefully, you can help make the difference. You're going to see case studies where it has been deployed. Maybe perhaps some diagrams are in order here. Okay, first of all, let's understand the resource. Just like the solar resource, we saw it was sunnier in some parts of the states, less sunny elsewhere, and everywhere more sunny than Germany. Well, a byproduct of solar radiation is that it keeps the ground underneath your project at constant temperature. So here's a Earth surface map of the very surface temperature of the Earth. So if you went down 20 feet down, what would you find? Well, what you're really seeing here is, let's say in Maine, your average year-round ground temperature is 44 Fahrenheit. So if you drill down 20 feet, it'll be 44 Fahrenheit. I can chill that ground to heat the home in Maine, or I can push heat into the ground to cool that home in Maine. Or your project could be in Southern California. And maybe the ground temperature is 72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. That's fine. That's a product of solar radiation. And again, we can make heat by chilling that 72-degree ground, or cool by pushing the heat into the 72-degree ground. So again, it's a sun-driven technology. That multiplication factor is really coming from energy that was put there by the sun. Let's see from a diagrammatic standpoint how we capture that. First, before I say that, the benefits that I mentioned about geothermal, sometimes before getting into technology, you show people the result first. Well, this is what I'm going to do right here. This is a bar chart you're looking at is the result of a load calculation done on a new building from the plans, where it says, okay, we know the envelope, we know where this project is located, we know which way it's exposed. Let's put in 5 different kinds of comfort systems in the computer model, put in the local energy prices, and see what the end result is of these 5 different comfort system technologies in terms of operating cost. So let me go through each of the bars. This is your geothermal system right here. So this is its annual energy consumption is the order of $3,500 a year. This one here is the electric baseboards example at $14,000 a year. That's electric baseboards for heat without that 6-to-1 mechanical advantage of the geothermal system, and regular central air. Now, we mentioned the air source heat pumps are all electric. They're shown here. So the air source heat pump would cost $8,500 a year if you bought the electricity to operate it. So that's one system for heating and cooling, very much like the geothermal, but it does not have the lowest operating cost. And it also will have a relatively short life because the compressors are outdoors, either taking up space in the yard or on the roof. So they'll fail and die of old age sooner than the geothermal heat pumps that are indoors. Now, this is what the obvious comparison is in most places that have natural gas. You say, okay, I want to use natural gas for heat. I'm going to use central air to cool. Okay, what does that really mean? That is $8,300 a year worth of energy. And then if you're not so lucky, you don't have gas, you could have bottled gas or oil. So here's our propane. So here's propane and central air at $11,000. I submit to you that this chart, if this was shown to your client based on their project or one just like it, I can fairly guarantee you that they'll be incredibly interested in the geothermal system, because the money that's spent to buy the energy is lost forever. So the money spent on natural gas and electricity, let's say in this example, that money is gone every time you pay for the bill. And you can't make your own natural gas either. So there's no way around that. So directly, the geothermal system has a huge cost advantage. And let's just say in our most obvious case, it has a $4,900 advantage a year over the air source heat pumps. And even across natural gas and central air, the geothermal still has a $4,700 a year advantage. So again, this is the business case, and this model can be run by a good geothermal contractor from your plan set and the local fuel prices. And yes, no matter how we change plan sets and fuel prices, I've seen hundreds of these calculations, the geothermal is always the winner by far on a project in the Northeast anyway. Okay, how does it work? So there's a lot on this diagram. Let me step you through it so you get an idea of what's involved, and I'll do my best to keep it as simple as I can. So let's take the indoor part here. Indoors, you have a package unit, and what that does, it has an air handler in the top section, and the air handler supplies, I'm showing the heating mode, supplies warm air to the supply registers, and it intakes the cooler air coming from the return registers. Pretty simple. Same with the air handler for air conditioning works, or for multiple kinds of systems. The magic is what happens down here. You have a 2-scroll compressor with a low speed and a high speed. What that does is it can pump heat from the building into the ground or vice versa. So we're doing the heating mode example. This is the ground loop shown right here. This is the part that's buried in the yard. These bores go down, let's say 200 feet, let's assume. And I see 3 bores here. 1, 2, 3. So this is like a giant underground radiator, for lack of a better word. So this is coupled into the ground. There's a mixture of glycol and water, or green glycol and water flowing through this, going around and around. This is called a closed loop type system. This is the closed loop. So in the example that we're doing here, let's say that the ground temperature is 53 degrees. Great. So when the heat pump heats the air in the house, it chills the water going into the loop. So let's say the water going into the loop here, it's entering the loop at 35 Fahrenheit. It goes underground, comes back up, and maybe it comes back up at 48 Fahrenheit. Okay, that was heated up by the ground. And then the cycle gets repeated over and over again with the warmer water coming back from the ground and the colder water going into the ground. So what you're really seeing here is we are chilling the ground on this side to be able to heat the building on this side. Sounds simple enough. And I think the cooling cycle will be even more obvious to explain. We're sending hot water down and bringing warm water back up. Now, as a byproduct of the operation of the geothermal system, we can preheat domestic hot water. It's an inexpensive or free byproduct of the operation of the heat pump. So if we had an application with very little hot water demand, maybe this would make all the hot water for the project. So let's say just have a couple sinks to wash hands in. I'm sure it would make that much hot water. However, most of the energy is going into heating, cooling the building. So the reality is it's a very rare project where the geothermal system will make 100% of the hot water. However, preheating that hot water does represent energy savings in the ultimate heating of the hot water. So the de-superheater feature of the geothermal system will preheat hot water, only a certain amount of hot water, only to a certain temperature, but that will reduce the amount of energy it takes for the secondary system to make all the hot water. So that's our schematic. Now let's take a look at how it sits within the building itself. Here's our simplest model. We have an all-forced air distribution here. So in the all-forced air distribution, we have our package unit in the basement. We have our ground loop, sorry for the misspelling, our ground loop drilled underground. What's happening here is the heat pump is sending supply air that's conditioned out of the registers, warm air in the winter, cold air in the summer. The air flows through the project. It goes back to the supply ducts, goes back into the heat pump. Real simple. Now let's go to the how that can look in a mechanical room. This is all the mechanics for a 4,000 square foot house. So what you're seeing here is your heat pump, the geothermal heat pump. Here's an air handler. Here's a compressor section. This is some of the duct work. The rest of it's behind the unit. This is the piping for the radiant floors. Yes, a geothermal system can heat either through duct work or can distribute heat through the radiant floors. Cooling is ordinarily only done through the duct work. You'll also see this electric air source heat pump water heater. It's a much more efficient electric water heater than a resistance tank, and it's being preheated by the geothermal system. So remarkably simple, totally durable, nothing outdoors, nothing to catch fire, no fuel. And for every kilowatt hour of electricity you give this heat pump, you're going to get 6 kilowatt hours of heat inside the building. Okay, this case studies I think you should find enlightening because it shows that this net zero, near zero energy we've spoken of, it's not a pipe dream, it's not a fantasy. It's a question of blocking and tackling. Once you have the right project developer and the right exposure and the right project in your drawing board, just about everything is possible. I'm going to give you several examples here that are already built and how they played out through time. First one is a near zero energy home from 2007. This is out in the Hamptons. This is a full-time home occupied by a family, and it is near zero, meaning the comfort system is entirely offset by the solar, the biggest consumer. However, they have other loads, like they have an outdoor pool, as you see here, and every comfort known to man inside the home. So let's see what went into this. It's a super insulated home, spray foam, blower door tested, air sealed. It has a heated outdoor pool that's heated with natural gas, but it's fully exposed, so it doesn't take that much heat. It has the geothermal heating and cooling system, an older one, and it does use natural gas for the stove and the hot water. All the lighting is LED or CFL, and all the appliances are Energy Star. This house, since it was built, has less than $100 a month in electric bills and a small natural gas bill for the domestic hot water, the stove, and the pool heat. So this is dramatically better in terms of carbon footprint, operating costs, and even though it's 13 years old by now, 12 years old, it still performs really well. Let's go to the data. This is its electric bill. As you will see, its annual operating cost in electricity is $1,100, which is about, I don't know, a tenth of what the bill would be on a similar house without all the efficiency and renewable energy elements. And I talked about net metering, the ability to turn the meter forward or backwards. The individual months in red, each row here is a month. The ones in red are the months where we turn the meter backwards. So here, the customer in the month of June generated a surplus of 296 kilowatt hours that was credited to be used up in the dead of winter when the solar can't keep up with the geothermal. So again, $1,000 year operating cost for the electricity, small natural gas bill, and this is a 12-year-old project without the latest and greatest in the geothermal, or even a design that was purposefully designed to maximize solar real estate. This does still play out well from a real estate standpoint. You have your main south cable, you have a secondary south cable, and then you have a west-southwest dormer here. There's even one more solar surface which went unused. That'll probably become the home for either more solar electric panels or maybe a solar water heater. Okay, so this is a very successful project. Let's go all the way now. This is a net zero new home. You saw the roof of this earlier on when I showed our residential new construction example. It's the project you see right here. This is a ranch house, so there's not that much square footage to be conditioned underneath that roof. And you have the solar array facing south at a good angle, pretty much optimized. You see your overhangs for passive solar here. So you're blocking the summer sun and accepting the winter sun. This is also a AI Long Island Residential Sustainable Design winner. And here's your west elevation up here. And again, you can see the effects of the overhang to keep that summer sun out of the glass. You can see how bright and airy this project is inside. And this is not really compromised in any sense of the word. This is exactly the ranch that the owners wanted. But by adding the efficiency elements, the solar and the geothermal, they've got themselves a net zero home with minimal ongoing operating costs, just their monthly meter charge, high comfort level, beautiful home. Let's go to commercial now. So here we have a Tudor Time. I don't know if that chain is national, but certainly there's a lot of them in Long Island and New York State. It's basically a learning center for children so that parents who might have to work late in the evenings can have their kids do after-study programs and so forth at this learning center. The owner of this owns another half a dozen of these two-time stores. And when he built the newest one, he decided that he would go net zero on the new one to see how it played out as compared to his existing stores. And I will tell you that load calculation is what changed his mind when we ran the load calculation on this building, and he realized how much he was going to save. This person's favorite kind of green has Ben Franklin on it, front to back. First, you'll notice the very full fill on the roof. The only obstacles are the facade creates shadows. We have to leave some panels out. The energy recovery ventilator, sorry, that's a skylight, I'm sorry. Leave some panels out. Here's our energy recovery ventilator. And yes, this corner was deleted for a tree that came out later. So we have a very full fill on a reflective white roof. That's good stuff. Now, this was actually a renovation, not a full construction. It was a fast food retail, and it's converted now, and it's a LEED Silver net zero building. As I said, the net zero was all about the operating cost. And as part of the renovation, the envelope was upgraded with the spray foam. The high efficiency geothermal system was installed with the energy recovery ventilators programmed to work off the carbon dioxide detectors. It has LED lighting with advanced controls, and obviously a large electricity system that was ballasted, and the engineering was done to make sure it would stay down in the hurricane and the structure could hold it. And the results of the first year of operation were dramatic, how good they were. And the comparison to the other store is pretty amazing. So this Tudor Time is a little bit bigger than its counterpart, the one we compared it to, the second newest one. And let's take a look at the results here. First of all, we could only run a load calculation in the new building. This is the load calculation for the Tudor Time itself. So once the owner saw it was a question of, $6,000 of electricity, which we could make from the roof to run the geothermal system, versus $12,800 worth of natural gas and electricity, there was only one solution that he was even the least bit interested in, which was the geothermal. If Ben Franklin is the driver, the geothermal has a big advantage, especially commercially. Now, it does help this has tax credits that went with it, and this owner does have to pay income tax, so he was able to capture all the tax credits. Let's look at our comparative. So what you're seeing here is a year's worth of billing data from the new store and from a previous store, which is actually smaller than the new store. Okay, so let me wrap this up for you. The new store only has a demand charge and a monthly meter charge. It's not buying any energy at all. So the new building has $6,000 a year in demand charges and meter charges. That's it. There's no fuel involved, no energy charges at all. Now the smaller, older store, which is the bottom block here, well, the older store consumed $21,000 worth of electric plus $6,000 worth of natural gas, with a total annual bill of $27,000. That is $21,000 more than the beautiful new building with better air quality, the LEED certification, etc. So clearly, this proved itself in terms of financial results. The old store also has to worry about increases in energy prices, increases in fuel prices, carbon monoxide poisoning, puffback. They have all those concerns where the new store wouldn't, with no fuel and no net energy purchased. So this was a winner. This was a LEED Silver building. And no, the customer did not choose to go LEED because he wanted to do the right thing for the environment. There was a set of financial incentives that made it worth getting LEED. And in the case of this new Tudor Time, because we'd already upgraded the envelope, installed the ERVs, the high efficiency lighting, the geothermal, and the solar, it had a lot of the requisite points and a lot of the energy and atmosphere points that made it really easy to obtain LEED certification. So in fact, things the client was buying anyway for financial benefit also helped with his energy and atmosphere points in his LEED rating. And that in turn allowed him to get to a LEED Silver without adding anything that did not have a return on investment. So everything else that he put in to meet the LEED was also things that would save him money or make his business more attractive to others. So I'll show you the scorecard and kind of summarize. There's a lot on here. So the LEED is broken up into sections. Horizon Engineering put this together. What you'll see is in the energy and atmosphere section, which carries a very high weighting these days, this building captured almost every single point. And in the other categories, they captured a couple of points here and there. So this was enough to be a LEED Silver. Interesting enough, the owner did not want to advertise this at all. He did not want the clients to have any idea that this was a net zero building with a LEED rating. His argument being the client would ask for a discount knowing that he didn't have an energy bill. Well, interestingly enough, the cat got out of the bag because the power company paid the rebates and went to the press with it. And although the owner was mortified, the store sold out in its first 8 weeks of operation, which is a record. And not a single customer asked for a break on the price. So his worst fears weren't realized. He got a great enrollment, great attendance, has a healthy example-setting environment for the children, and a huge financial benefit as compared to his existing base of stores. So recapping, renewable energy and energy efficiency were embraced in the past, and we want to take this as far as we can to minimize the operating costs and maximize the carbon reduction of our buildings. Anything that we do that's fossil fuel based is going the wrong direction. It's going to increase the greenhouse gases, the climate change, and the air quality issues. And we want to go in the opposite direction in that. We want to go net zero, near zero energy, eliminate the use of fossil fuels. In order to make all this practical, we've got to maximize the use of efficiency in our buildings. The less energy we consume, the better off we're going to be, and the easier it is to displace all that the remaining consumption with renewable energy, like, for example, solar power. And yes, you can go all the way. If we have enough energy produced from the rooftop or in the accessory structures to offset all the electricity consumed in the building, we have a net zero, zero carbon project. As you saw from the case studies, these are not pipe dreams. These are real life projects that stand today that you can go look at, have your clients look at, etc. And yes, there are significant financial environmental benefits of embracing renewable energy and energy efficiency to the project owners. And yes, the green cachet will be valuable to a lot of owners, either because it presents their values in a positive way, or it allows them to sell the project at a higher price later on. So we're going to move on to the Q&A section in just a minute here. I'll be answering the questions that you posed during this program here. As I said, any questions that are too big to be answered within this format or very project specific, I'll answer offline. I would like to take this opportunity to thank, again, American Solar Energy Society for putting on this webinar series, this being the first of their webinars aimed at design professionals. They'd be very grateful for your feedback and direction in terms of what to do in the future as far as future programming. My contact information is on this page. Please feel free to reach out to me directly if I can help you with your project. And even better, if you're in my local area, we'd be glad to help be your partner in renewable energy on your projects. So thanks again. Without further ado, we'll move this to the questions and answers section and answer all your questions. Thank you very much. So the first question on the table from our audience is, what is the cost of solar panels today? Let me do my best to first put it in historical context and then go ahead and answer from there. When the industry was relatively new, the cost of the solar panels was very high because they didn't have the manufacturing processes optimized that go behind them, nor do they have a large-scale type of fabrication they do today. So the cost of the solar panels has been going down over the years significantly, also helped by competitive forces amongst competing companies. So it's probably best not to speak in terms of price of the solar panels themselves, because it's not a do-it-yourself kind of thing. In terms of complete systems installed, I'm going to give you a pretty big range because we're talking about the whole United States here, and I'm sure there's quite a range. I would say in a commercial flat roof system, something like $2 per watt for an installed system is possible. Residential systems typically are more expensive because there's more fixed costs associated with a smaller system. You're still paying for the same engineering, you're still paying the same for permitting, etc. So I'd probably say residentially, $2.50 to $4 a watt is probably a reasonable range there. Now, because you're an urban architect, there's a question that wasn't asked that I think you probably do want to know about, and I think we have the time to cover it today. How feasible is solar and geothermal in an urban environment? Well, let me give you the pros and cons. Obviously, energy prices in the city can be very high. The desire to go green can be very high because the cities have air pollution issues and similar. The challenges you face are, first of all, building codes. Very often the building codes in a city will interfere with putting in big rooftops electricity systems. They want clearances for the fire department and all kinds of different accesses. So you might have a limited real estate situation. You also, on the geothermal side, drilling the ground loop is a challenge very often because we don't have a front yard, backyard, or parking lot to play with. You might have the building that covers the entire parcel. So in that case, perhaps the only feasible way is to either try and put the ground loop to the sidewalk, which would only be feasible for a smallish project, I believe, or to build the ground loop before the foundation goes in. So it's actually under the building. So the urban environment does have its challenges. The latest set of challenges in the urban environment, in answer to your question, Reina, is the battery storage. That's something that's very desirable in the cities because of time of use rates. However, the building code is not, and the fire code aren't really there yet in terms of allowing things that could catch fire inside the building. So for example, in our state, they're putting together regulations and codes that would allow battery systems to be more easily permitted within buildings. So again, cities are a challenging location. The need is definitely there. And I would say on the battery storage over the next couple of years, the permitting will probably be standardized within the city. That still doesn't mean that everything will be possible. Okay, now, question from the engineering side of life. How do the ballasted systems play out in terms of size and feasibility in high wind zones? So the simple rule of thumb is the taller the building is, the windier the location is, the more challenging the ballasting will be because the uplift forces will be higher on the solar array. And there's a limit to how much weight you can put underneath one of these things. So I believe size matters in this case. The larger the array, the more difficult it's going to be for the wind to blow it off the roof. So a large building, a ballasted system is possible at a pretty good height and a pretty good fill because it's a very big object to flip over or lift up on top of the roof. However, in a high wind zone where the building is small and the array is small, you might not be able to successfully ballast that against hurricane wind forces. So again, for ballasted systems, especially where the panels tilt up, larger arrays are highly preferred, and the engineering work is critical to make sure that the building can both support the weight and the panels will not blow off the roof in the process. Okay, now question from a client of ours who's an engineer, has a net near zero energy home. How feasible is a net zero retrofit residentially? Well, I'd probably say it's a rare bird in our climate to have something like that, but it's possible. The limiting factors tend to be, one, not a great envelope. A building that wasn't designed to be net zero and is older probably leaks pretty badly, and it'll be hard to make enough energy to offset the leakage. So if it comes to completely re-insulating the home, now that could be difficult or even short of requiring a renovation to actually redo the envelope of the home. Also, you have older mechanicals. So maybe the house is not fully ducted for the geothermal, and even getting ductwork in, let's say the house has plaster walls, that could be pretty difficult. So yes, there's probably rare cases out there where either the envelope was really good and the mechanicals were properly set up in terms of ductwork to have a net zero, but near zero retrofits are entirely feasible and very possible. So again, it's case by case, much easier to do than in renovation, where you can upgrade the envelope and install the ductwork and get the roof line optimized, but it can be possible in pure retrofit environment. Okay, the question comes as to how net zero and near zero energy buildings are reflected in the building code. I'm sorry to say they really aren't. I wish that was true. I think the closest that we see to that is that stretch code that we have in the Hamptons, which is basically forcing the larger homes to make a lot of their own energy and to be really efficient. But no, I have not seen a building code, at least in New York, that does something special for a net zero or near zero energy home. It just vastly exceeds the code that's in place. Okay. Now, question from Carmen Barnes of Time Inc. What do we think of the new Tesla solar roof tiles? If you remember what I said earlier about new technologies and the hazards that go with them in terms of build integrated, I mean, clearly integrating the roof and the solar production at once is a great idea. But when you think about an investment that the client is expecting to last 30 to 40 years and basing that on technology that's really brand new and a company that's not really that stable and well-funded, I see elements of risk there. In other words, what if the company goes under and there's no spares 5 years from now? What if there was a design flaw that made it not work the way it was supposed to? And maybe the company won't be around or be able to pay the warranty claims to make that right. Also, that particular system does have an age issue where you have a 100-year glass roof, but you have a 40-year or 30-year solar cell. I guess that means that after you're 40, you have a glass roof, but you don't really have any meaningful solar output. So again, the solar panel systems, it's a highly competitive field. And there are multiple manufacturers with long track records and proven products and the ability to manufacture at scale that won't put your projects at risk. So again, these build integrated technologies, it's an element of risk that you may or may not want to take within your projects. And I can't tell you from where I sit here, if one of these building integrated technologies will be so successful and so prevalent, there'll be multiple stable manufacturers with long track records and proven products to use in that space. I certainly hope so, but we don't seem to have that right now. So let's see if any more questions to the audience. I think we've covered the questions to the audience just now. I want to spend a second thanking all of you for joining us here for this ASES webinar. As you know, this is the first of the kind for architects and design professionals. American Solar Energy Society would be very grateful for your feedback, so that they know what to deliver to the audience going forward. Again, I'm hoping that the audience will take this to heart and ask their clients the questions of whether they want to lower their operating costs and carbon footprint through renewable energy, and whether they can add those elements to their projects as part of the drawing board design process. So again, we're trying to make a greener world here. We do it one client at a time. And those client projects are on your drawing boards. And by asking the right questions and working with the right integrators, hopefully you can minimize or eliminate the carbon footprint, climate change effects, and operating costs to a great extent for your clients. My contact information was in the final slide. I am glad to reach out to you with any, to answer any specific questions you have that I can help you with. And again, I want to thank American Solar Energy Society for the opportunity to share this program with you. And they're grateful for your feedback. So without further ado, let me allow Carly of American Solar Energy Society to put her last couple sentences here. Thank you again for participating, and hope to be of service making your projects as green and as sustainable as they can be going forward. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jean-Pierre, for presenting your program to us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for today's webinar. There will be a short survey that'll get sent out to you a couple hours after the webinar is complete. And we would love, love, love to receive your feedback from today's program. We hope you join us again for our future webinars. Please feel free to sign up to receive our emails if you're interested in getting some more information on any future programs from ASES, and hopefully more from Jean-Pierre in the future. Thank you again, and we hope you have a wonderful day.